What's going on, guys? It's Cimo. So today I'm bringing to you my top 5 meta decks for the January 2021 format. Happy New Year's, everyone. Hope you all had a wonderful holiday, and with a new year comes a new format. And if you can believe it, a lot has actually changed since we made one of these videos. We've left the insanely crazy combo format of the last year, and we've entered more of a control-oriented format, but we'll talk about that a little bit later on. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. So kicking things off at number 5, I'm going with Zoodiac. Now, it's no surprise that Zoodiac can thrive in a control-based format. Zoodiac's one of the strongest control decks ever, and if you guys think back to when Zoodiac was first released back in Raging Tempest, Zoodiac just had plenty of control tools at its disposal, and now it has Zeus, so if the deck couldn't get any better, you know, Zeus is just kind of the cherry on top of the Zoodiac sundae. However, there are multiple variants of Zoodiac. Obviously, pure Zoo is an option, but there's multiple different directions you can take the deck. There's stuff like Dogmatica Zoodiac, there's Eldlich Zoodiac, and we'll talk about that more a little bit later. But when you look at all the different variations of Zoodiac that you can play, or if you just take Zoodiac as an engine and throw it in with another deck, because it's very easy to just slap a Drytron on any end board that you have that you've already comboed off with, especially since Zoodiac makes it so easy. I think if Zeus didn't exist, it would make it a lot more difficult to justify this deck being in the number 5 slot, but it's got a win rate of about 52-ish%, so it's in the low 50s, and it's been able to hang up there with some of the best, so I decided to go ahead and give my number 5 slot to Zoodiac. But coming in at number 4, we have another fan favorite deck that continues to dominate the top of the metagame, and that deck is, of course, Dinosaur. Now, Dinosaur is a bit of an interesting enigma, because when we first got the December 2020 ban list, a lot of people weren't too optimistic about the deck. Remember, Dinosaur was one of, if not the best deck of the past several months leading into the new year, and then once we got that ban list, that definitely shook things up. When you look at some of the matchups and how Dinosaur fared against them, it was a little bit difficult to justify, but then people realized that Dinosaur is just absolutely crazy and quickly got over those reservations. Now, when we did see the initial tournament results after the first wave of events from the December 2020 ban list, Dinosaur wasn't performing too well, but it didn't take a week until we saw the events from the extravaganza, and Dinosaur was converting very well, getting multiple top cut slots in that particular event. Now, again, we only have a small handful of events to go off of here, but when you look at the data on sites like such as YGeoscope, just so you can take these win percentages and the like, Dinosaur is faring in about the mid 50 percentile. I think it's like a 56 or 57% at the time of recording, so that's pretty decent, especially considering it is like the number 1, 2, or 3 most played deck at the moment, depending on how you like to do the addition on what the most played deck is. And so that's insane, and that's something you definitely have to acknowledge, that it has a solid win rate and it's one of the most played decks, and the deck's also just busted. Miscellaneousaurus did not get hit on the ban list. Hell, nothing from the deck got really hit on the ban list at all, and so when you're able to overwhelm your opponent with such brute force from the dinosaurs, you still have Ultimate Conductor Tyranno, you still have all the broken cards, add 3 by the way, that enable Dinosaur to be the powerhouse that it is. Whether you're going first or second, Dinosaur is a force to be reckoned with, and so it's no surprise that Dinosaur is in my number 4 spot. Now, coming in at number 3, we have a deck that is making 2021 look golden, and that deck is, of course, Eldlich. Now, this is going to be a rather long section of the video because there are so many different Eldlich variants running around right now that I want to dedicate a little bit of time to each of them, just so you guys can understand the breadth of how far Eldlich's reach truly is. You've got pure Eldlich, which, let's be honest, is probably like the weakest of all the forms, because if you're going to play pure Eldlich, you might as well just throw in a small Dragoon package and play Dragoon Eldlich, and that is one of the most popular variants of the deck. If we're talking about like the lowest of the low in terms of representation of Eldlich, it's either like pure, maybe the live twin variant, although the live twin variant's kind of cool. It is rather embryonic, but some of the top players are piloting it. It just gives the deck a little bit of extra reach and is somewhat reminiscent of more of the combo Eldlich, because it's able to do things that Eldlich natively doesn't have access to, but the Eldlich engine, as we've already seen in the past, is very splashable and rather flexible. So I think it's really cool that some top players are playing around with this, and I would really love to see this deck do well because it would just be another win for Genesis Impact. Going on though, we do have plenty of other Eldlich variants. We have Zoodiac Eldlich, and this is probably one of the most popular variants of the deck. Honestly, this is one of the reasons why Zoodiac was my number 5 slot, because I feel like Eldlich pulls Zoodiac up so much because the two archetypes just harmonize so well together, because it allows you to just kind of take from both ends of everything you could possibly want in a deck. The deck is very controlling, it's super grindy, it's got huge blowout cards like Zeus, it's just able to constantly grind out opponent after opponent. It's probably the strongest control deck in the format, if we're going to be honest, and it's just able to access so many different tools at once that it truly has a wonderful repertoire. I suppose it's worth mentioning Invoked Eldlich, although this variant of the deck isn't seen nearly as much as it used to when the deck was first released back in Secret Slayers, but there are a few people still running around with it wanting to give it a shot. We also have Dogmatica Eldlich, and hell, there's even like Dogmatica Zoodiac Eldlich variants running around too, so people are even taking the hybrids and mashing them together to create these tribrid decks, and it's just getting insane. I already mentioned Dragoon Eldlich. I think Dragoon Eldlich is one of the most popular builds because, as we discussed previously, with the lack of hits to Dragoon or any of the ancillary pieces around Dragoon that facilitate it, I'm talking about Red Eyes Fusion, Verte Anaconda, and the like, it's no surprise that Dragoon has re-entered the format in a big way. And so, seeing a card like this in a deck like Eldlich, it just fits naturally because the deck doesn't really care too much about the extra deck. You can play cards like Pot of Extravagance freely. It just gives you another boss monster and really like a solid win condition outside of just trying to grind your opponent out that Eldlich desperately needs. There's even a 60 card variant of Eldlich running around playing some of Yu-Gi-Oh's best trap cards of all time, and I think that is just insane. Not to mention, trap cards are great right now. If you take a look at the format and how it's slowed down to a degree, traps actually have a lot of power. When you look at cards like Ice Dragon's Prison, Torrential Tribute, these cards are starting to see a lot more play because they are much more devastating than they had been previously, because now that the format is slower and it really isn't about this turn one break my board sort of environment to a degree, then these types of cards can enter the format and are actually able to flip the table and allow you to get back into the game, which is kind of the position that trap cards find themselves in at this point, but it's much more prominent now than it has been in the past. I just think it's fantastic that a 60 card amalgamation of Eldlich can see this level of success and is arguably one of the best variants of the deck. But even despite that, think about all these different Eldlich variants that we've discussed. There's so much room for ingenuity and innovation with this archetype, and people are still experimenting to figure out what the best list is. I just love when people take the time to do that, and I love when Yu-Gi-Oh's in this place that it's almost this sort of renaissance where people are trying to figure out how to just constantly improve the deck over and over again, and Eldlich has evolved so many times, and it seems like it's continuing to do so even in 2021. The deck's win rate is over 60%, and it is able to just clean up in this format. It pairs very well against some of the better decks, which we'll get to in a moment. So for all the reasons just mentioned, Eldlich, without a doubt, has to be my number 3 slot. But coming in at number 2, we have a deck that a lot of people look to as the best deck of the format after the December 2020 ban list, but after some time and people have started to figure out the format, it just wasn't able to grasp that number 1, although it is pretty close, so it's probably up for debate, but that deck is Virtual World. Virtual World helped shape the format that we are currently in, because when a deck like this is able to make true King of all Calamities with such ease, and is also able to make it multiple times either in the same turn or through multiple consecutive turns to just put the pressure on the opponent, it's going to warp the format. When VFD is in the format, you have to figure out a way to work around it so that you can either play in such a way that true King of all Calamities doesn't really affect you, or you have to find a way to stop your opponent from getting to that Calamities and then setting up your own board to ensure that that is not going to be the card to lose to. So to be fair, Virtual World, while it isn't the best deck, it is definitely a deck that has helped molded the way the rest of this format looks, and it's definitely a much slower deck than what we've seen in the past. When you look at the end boards that this deck is able to assemble, most of the time it's just true King of all Calamities, maybe something like a QB, and then you also have the back row trap Chuchit, which is able to then pop cards on the field. That doesn't look too intimidating, but you'd be surprised at the number of decks that have a difficult time dealing with true King of all Calamities. Players have to play cards in their main deck and side deck to be able to appropriately deal with this card, because otherwise they're just going to be left in the dust, because there's probably never been a deck deck more consistently able to produce true King of all calamities than Virtual World. Now, that doesn't mean the deck is without its downsides, because obviously there are some consistency issues with the deck, and with the way the format's shaping up and players are having to play more defensive cards to kind of stop some of the other threats in the format, that actually narrowly reduces the consistency of the deck, because now you're having to stop your opponent from playing the game and play the balancing act of wanting to achieve your own win condition as well. But Virtual World is definitely in the driver's seat, and more decks are having to accommodate their strategy to help combat Virtual World. Now, the deck has a great win rate, over 60%. I believe it's at 62 to 63% at the time of recording, and is one of the most played decks in the online environment. We've also seen the past few months how the deck has been winning event after event, and even if it isn't winning, its top cut conversion is one of the best in the entire game, at least for the past several formats. So those are all accolades that you have to give it credit for. But there is a deck that has still managed to just edge it out, and that's what we're going to be talking about right now. But for the time being, Virtual World is still a great deck. It's still a powerhouse. It's still just going to hose people with true King of all calamities, and so that's why I gave it my number 2 spot. So that's going to bring us to my number 1 meta deck of the January 2021 format. And if you haven't already figured it out, I don't know what you've been doing for the past month, but that deck is, of course, Drytron. Drytron came out of Genesis Impact swinging, and it has not disappointed. Now, when we first saw Drytron, I had it in the middle of this list back in December because we only had a few events worth of data to go off of, and so I typically like to give it a little bit of time before I overvalue something, although it's purely subjective, so it doesn't really matter. The thing is, though, we just really didn't know. We've seen in the past where sometimes we'll get a new deck, it'll do great for the first couple of weeks, and then people will start to figure out what the deck actually does. They'll side for it appropriately, maybe even main deck for it appropriately, and then it'll start to fall by the wayside. We've seen that time and time again with many other decks, and so I didn't want to see Drytron follow a similar trajectory, but after what we've been seeing, Drytron is just everywhere in the online environment. Again, depending on how you're doing the math, this is the most played deck of the format, if not like the second most, just second to Virtual World, and this deck is absurd. Some of the setups this deck can do turn 1 are ridiculous. It's able to set up numerous negations with cards like Herald of Ultimateness. It can go into stuff like Abyss Dweller. It can go into Vanity's Ruler, which a lot of decks really struggle to deal with Vanity's Ruler. True King of all calamities was already bad enough from Virtual World, but when you're having to stack your deck to deal with a card like Calamities as well as Vanity's Ruler, it just really negates a lot of your options in terms of what types of decks you want to play, because if you don't get your outs, or if your deck just can't really play around that, it's going to be a very difficult time for you. What makes Drytron so powerful is its ability to constantly abuse a card like Cyber Angel Ben 10 because it doesn't have that once per turn clause, effectively turning it into like a Necros of Brionac, and you're able to just get so much value off of the Drytron cards. Being able to tribute constantly over and over and over again, the Drytrons are just able to extend beyond so many different types of effects that it makes it really difficult to try and contain the deck. And even though the deck is able to spam out onto the field, and it does kind of create this dynamic of the break my board variety, it still is a very controlling deck. When you're playing cards like Herald of Ultimateness to basically lock your opponent out of the game, hell, the deck even plays Herald of the Orange Light in tandem with a card like Eva, and what's so cool about Eva is that Eva can actually fetch you another copy of Herald of the Orange Light, then that way you're able to just constantly keep getting more negations, and that can protect what is already on your board, like Abyss Dweller, like Vanity's Ruler. Hell, you can go into IP Masquerena because, again, the Drytrons are so good at spamming. Some of the setups seem rather innocuous with this deck, but when you start to realize that your opponent may have like 5-6 different negations on the field, then it's going to be incredibly rough. Now, as strong as the deck may be, it isn't unbeatable, right? People have already started to identify and ascertain the cards that are really going to put the deck on lock, and have started to incorporate those into their main or side deck. The thing is, though, this deck's win rate is like 65% online, which is probably the highest in the entire online environment, also considering the fact that it's the most played deck online as well. Again, we've already seen some of the previous tournaments where the deck has performed. It's had a decent top cut conversion, and more people have had time now to refine the deck, figure out the best way to play it, whether it's in more of a pure state, whether it's playing stuff like Herald of Ultimateness, Vanity's Ruler, maybe the Megalith. There's been a Megalith variant, which has a lot of different pros and cons compared to the more pure streamlined versions of the deck. I just think it's incredible to see rituals are at the top tiers of competitive play once again. Konami isn't really shy of reintroducing cards of older summoning mechanics to help boost those older mechanics. I mean, look at Red Eye's Dark Dragoon. That just got fusions back on the map real quick. We had Synchros this time around. Xyz, I mean, just look at Zeus. There really is no explanation. So Konami's not shy in this regard, but Rituals being back at tier 1, I just think that is incredible, and we'll have to see what happens. Obviously, Necros was the last time this happened, and the ban list was not too merciful to them, so we're gonna have to see if any of the Drytrons or maybe Cyber Angel Ben 10, due to that lack of once per turn clause, is going to be able to survive an upcoming ban list in the next few months. But for the time being, Drytron's not going anywhere. It's most likely the deck to beat, and that's why I had to declare it the #1 meta deck of January 2021. We'll just have to see what happens, but man, things are heating up. So guys, that's gonna wrap it up for the video. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always. Subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. And if you found this video informative, consider supporting me on Patreon or becoming a YouTube channel member. Thank you guys so much for watching the video, and we'll see you next time.